A little bit about us. Democracy for America was started in 2004 by Howard Dean after his campaign ended. And it was a very interesting endeavor in that we were going to, as he said, we're going to run people for office in every part of the country and all over the place. And we're going to let the members decide who we're going to go support. And that was pretty cool. And in fact, we had an awful lot of fun in 2004. And we helped a lot of folks. And we caused a little bit of trouble, which has always been something that inured to my own personality. You can be 60 and be the middle child in a family. I just wanted you to know that. So, it was pretty cool. But then Howard abandoned us and went to the Democratic National Committee, where actually the DNC started to do that for a while, which, by the way, I might add, was incredibly productive on a lot of different levels. And we soldiered on, and we are now a community of about 1 plus 250,000 members, 250,000 members, 1 million, and which is awesome. And really what we've been about is trying to mostly help people who want to change this country. I think we all want to do that. And I think it's very difficult to do, as I know some of you have heard me to say, and anyone who's ever been to one of our trainings, it's hard to have a job. It's hard for all of you to do what you have to do all day and take care of the folks you love, and then attend a Board of Education meeting for 3 hours every night. Our job is to make that easier. And yes, we do that through a training program, which we've actually been doing since in the 10 years that we've now in existence. Thank you all very much. And we do that in a lot of other ways, mostly by supporting people who are changing their communities or changing the world at large. And that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean a woman named Susan Smith in Florida who is doing an awful lot in the party. It started the party's own progressive caucus in Florida for the first time and has been working very, very hard on education and furthering the cause of public education. It could be folks like Tom Brown here and Alec and Shari, who did so much work in the last election cycle. And it could be the work that all of you have done to help candidates get elected. We do a lot of electoral. We did something like 160 campaigns in 2012, which was very, very exciting. So we continue to work with members who are supporting good candidates. We continue to try to find campaigns that are going to be game changers in changing the national consciousness. And we continue to see an awful lot of opportunities this coming year that are ahead of us. And in particular, I would draw your attention to the fact that there's some 30 states have something going on with minimum wage right now. And let's not think bigger here, because minimum wage is about getting a living wage so people who work for a living in this country can make a living. But minimum wage is also a proxy for a lot of other battles that are going on right now, which is trying to expand health care coverage, trying to do something about Social Security benefits and not try to play defense on that, which we're also very involved with. And it extends even to other issues that are related to economic inequality, which includes campaign finance reform. And we have a great opportunity there. New York State, by the way, believe it or not, is very, very close to passing a public financing of elections bill for its renowned and very legendary state legislature. It's a little bit different this year. It's not the fervor of 2012 or the fervor of Obama's election in 2008, and sometimes it's a little hard for me to find what it is that we can grasp onto that's going to get people going. And then all of a sudden, our members respond to this by having 750 house parties to screen Robert Reich's film Inequality for All, which is probably actually a record of house parties that we've had since Howard was campaigning for president. So our members lead the way. So I think with that, I think it's time for our founding chair, the person who started it all and got us off the ground, for my brother Howard, to say a few words if you're okay with it.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. I always defer to my older brother whenever.
True.
Very important birthday coming up for Jim, though.
Yeah, that's right.
3 days, 4 to 5 days.
The big 3-0?
Yeah, the big 3-0, right? The big 3-0.
Yeah, I'm short of Medicare, but we're going to have a discussion later. That's right. The rest of it
You find that when Medicare services go up, they throw everything.
I'll tell you something interesting about Medicare to get into the topic that I've been assigned, which is to talk about what's going on in D.C. What's interesting about Medicare is it took me 10 minutes to sign up for Medicare. if we had had a public option, none of this website stuff would have happened. We would have been taking back the House and the Senate. That is a fact. That is a fact. Because the only thing that's preventing us from taking back the House and defending the Senate is the website collapse. Before that, the Republicans were absolutely in terrible shape, and we rescued them. And if we'd only had the public option, that wouldn't have happened, because it took 10 minutes to. If you couldn't get on the site, you just push the button.
Even though the government was shut down due to their efforts.
That's right. No problem.
Nobody said that. But
well, they remembered about who shut the government down, but then they didn't care when the website collapsed. Anyway, let me just do a quick overview of DC, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for either of us. So actually, I'm modestly optimistic. And I'll tell you why. A couple of things. There are some signs that the Tea Party is in its demise, as I predicted it would be, simply because they simply don't represent anybody in America except for white Christians over 65, and that's an increasingly shrinking demographic group, and I wouldn't say they represent all white Christians over 65, because I'm one of them, and they certainly don't represent me. But the Texas primaries were a disaster for the Tea Party. Every major race was won by the establishment Republicans. Not that they're all that great. I mean, they're not, for the most part. Most of them aren't crazy. There are some that are. And even in the worst campaigner of David Dewhurst, who lost to Ted Cruz, got into a runoff with his Tea Party person, although his Tea Party opponent might still win that, which would be an improvement over David Dewhurst, who's been probably the weakest and the worst lieutenant governor in the history of Texas, and you have to go some to say that about Texas. So that was the first thing. The second thing is David Camp's budget. Dave Camp is the modestly conservative. He just talks a better game than he really is, because he's so afraid, as all those guys are, of the Tea Party. But he passed a bill out of his committee, which is real tax reform. Now, there's a bunch of Republican gimmicks in there and stuff like that, but there's a real closure of corporate loopholes in that bill. And then Boehner comes and says, well, I don't know that we can trust the president, so we might not be able to do tax reform. What he really meant was, that's Boehner speak for 80 of my caucus members don't trust me, so I can't do anything. But it is an opportunity to think that a Republican would dare to antagonize the Tea Party and put out, certainly not a progressive tax reform, but a tax reform with real substance, and there's some things in that bill that we would like as progressive Democrats. So that was, I thought, something that was pretty interesting. And the last piece, of course, is now the split in the Republican Party over same-sex marriage. And they're not voting for it, but they understand that with this new generation, they have no hope of winning any significant percentage of the under 35 vote if they continue gay bashing. Now, my question is, that's a fine demographic. What about the biggest demographic at all they're having trouble with, which is 53% of the electorate, which is women? They don't mind women bashing, and I guess they're going to do that until they learn to stop that as well. But they have stopped the gay bashing on the sort of more establishment side. And that's a good sign, because it's better to have two mainstream parties than it is one group of insane crackpots, and when we have to have both halves of the mainstream debate ourselves among the Democrats. So I do see the signs that now the radical right is not collapsing. The Koch brothers continue to fund it with huge amounts of money. But I do see the American people getting sick of the right wing. They're extremist, they're unpleasant, they don't like women, they don't like gays, they don't like immigrants, they don't like anybody except people who look like them. And as I said before, that's an incredibly fast decreasing demographic. So that's a lot of good news. The other good news is there are some things that are actually the president's doing that I think are helpful, despite the fact that he can't get the legislature to vote for any of it. And one of them is in the environmental area. He's really goosed up the EPA to do some really significant stuff. And a lot of it's going to court, but a lot of it isn't. And his rulemaking power really does affect what can be done. And again, I get fed up with some of the things that are going on in D.C., but we are making progress. My greatest hope, of course, is that we will have a Democratic president succeed, because we were arguing the merits of one of them here at the table. But one thing that nobody can disagree with is that the Supreme Court nominees, should we hold another 8 years of the presidency after 16 years of Democratic rule, will be thoughtful, sentient, smart lawyers who actually care what the Constitution says, which is a big improvement over the 5 that we have now, with the exception of Kennedy, who I disagree with, but I think he is actually an honest jurist. I think Roberts, Scalia, Alito, and Thomas really don't belong in the court. The other small piece of good news is that it was a budget worked out between Patty Murray and Paul Ryan, which is was certainly not the budget I'd be pleased to support, but it is a real budget. We haven't had one of those for a long time. So I'm hoping that the Republicans are beginning to understand that they don't actually work for the Republican Party, they work for the people of the country. And at some time they might actually respond to some of the things their
Do
constituents
you really think that?
want. Do I think they think that? No,
don't
I
see
think
that at
I think really all they want to do is get elected, but they're finally dawning on them that they can't, that the country is not radical right, and they're not going to agree with the likes of Ted Cruz, Steve King, and Louis Gohmert, who seem to be representative of their party these days. I could go on for a long time. I'll spend a little bit of time on Obamacare, and then then we can open it up to whatever you'd like to talk about. Obviously, this was not my favorite idea of how to reform healthcare, but there are a number of things that are good. First of all, you can get to where we want to get to in terms of insuring everybody through this system. Switzerland's done it. The Netherlands has done it. They're heavily regulated, so if you like regulation, it would have been easier to have a single payer because there's less regulation in that. But we are expanding the number of insured people in this country, and in Massachusetts, where this was done 5 years earlier than the president did it, 98.5% of all their people have health insurance. So that's good. What hasn't been done is there's no cost control of any kind, and we're going to have to switch away from a fee-for-service system to a pay-per-patient system, because all the incentives now in medicine are to do as much as you possibly can, whether it does any good or not. And we have an illness system. We all get paid when you're really sick. We'd like to have a wellness system where we get paid for keeping you healthy, and you get that by switching the financial incentives. It's not that the medical industrial establishment is crooked. I don't think that's true. I think they get paid very well to keep doing what they're doing, which is spending a hell of a lot of our money at 3 times the rate of inflation, and that's a system that isn't going to work. And it's going to be a very hard change, because it's not just about whether you have a Democrat or a Republican in the White House or in the Congress or so forth. It's about fundamentally taking on an economy that's 20% of our total GNP, which is an extraordinary thing to do, and it's going to be very, very hard because there are obviously a lot of vested interests in that system, some of whom are our friends, but they're not going to want to change because change is hard and change is always a little scary.
And isn't that linked to liability reform?
It's not really linked to liability. The Republicans always say it's linked to liability reform. Liability reform does matter, but it's not nearly the factor that people say it is.
For sure.
And if you change the payment system, there's some things you can do so that it won't be. I mean, there are a lot of states that have done liability reform. There are some that are really awful. Kentucky, for example, I think has the worst business climate in the country, despite Steve Beshear's great job on the exchange, and which is his state badly needed. But they do need liability reform. I mean, it's really a bad place to do business. But most of the liability reform doesn't have to be as drastic as it has been in places like Texas and Florida, which is also a bright spot, by the way, because the Democrats are going to win the governorship in Florida.
Yay.
How about that? Although the victor is going to be a former Republican, but former is better than existing, right? So I think I'll be quiet with that one. I'll just, after that, I just say the Congress is going to be tough. Winning back the 17 seats we need is going to be very difficult unless something else changes, which it could. Holding on to the Senate is going to be hard, but I think we'll do it. My prediction is that Mary Landrieu wins, that Kay Hagan wins, and that the guy from Alaska wins, Mark Begich. And if we win those seats, which I think we will, then it's almost impossible for them to take it back. We may have some unpleasant losses in difficult states like West Virginia. But I do think we have with those 3 really conservative states holding those seats, I think it's going to be really tough for the Republicans to win. But we'll see. Those are going to be hard races. The reason I picked those is Begich is a great senator for Alaska. He's been very good, and he's towed the line enough on the Democratic side, so I think we have to consider him a good, strong Democrat as well as, but really good with his constituency. Mary Landrieu is tough as nails and comes from a really great political family in Louisiana, and she certainly doesn't vote the way we might like all the time, but her vote is a whole lot better than what we're going to get if the other guy wins. And Hagan is an interesting case. She's reasonably progressive, She's going to win because the people of North Carolina are so embarrassed and so angry at their governor and their legislature, who ran as moderates and then have really, in some ways, been the most embarrassing legislature in the entire country.